5 years. That's how long my husband had been gone. 5 years since the hospital room went silent. 5 years since the machine stopped beeping. 5 years since I learned how loud loneliness can be. People say time heals everything. They're lying. Time doesn't heal, it teaches you how to live with the pain. Every month on the first Friday, I sent $200 to my mother-in-law. Not because anyone forced me, not because she asked, but because it felt like the last thing connecting me to the man I loved. His mother, Margaret, lived alone in the same small house my husband grew up in. A pale blue house with chipped paint and a mailbox that leaned slightly to the left. I remembered standing on that porch years ago, holding my husband's hand, nervous, hoping she would like me. She never hugged me much, never said I love you. But after my husband died, she cried harder than anyone. At least that's what I thought. The money wasn't easy for me. I worked long hours, skipped vacations, bought cheap groceries. But every time I sent that $200, I told myself, this is what he would have wanted. Margaret always thanked me, sometimes with a short text, sometimes with a voicemail that sounded tired and weak. I don't know how I'd survive without you, she once said. Those words stayed with me until the day a stranger leaned over a fence and shattered everything I believed. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon. I was visiting Margaret's house, dropping off groceries. She said her knees hurt too much to drive lately. The door was locked, which was strange. She usually waited for me. As I stood there confused, a voice came from next door. You shouldn't be here. I turned. An older woman stood on her porch, arms crossed, eyes sharp. She looked at me like she'd been holding something in for a long time. I'm sorry, I said. She stepped closer to the fence between the houses. You're the one who sends her money, right? My stomach tightened. Yes, I am. The woman let out a dry laugh. Then you really need to stop. I froze. Why would I do that? She lowered her voice. Because you're being lied to. My heart began to race. She doesn't need your money, the woman said. In fact, you should check the car. What car? I asked. She pointed behind the house. The new one. I felt cold all over. Margaret had told me she barely had enough for groceries, that her medications were expensive, that sometimes she skipped meals. A new car. That's not possible, I whispered. The woman looked at me with something close to pity. I've lived next to her for 15 years. I see everything. Before I could ask another question, Margaret's front door opened. She stepped out, and her face went pale the moment she saw me standing there. And in that second, before a single word was spoken, I knew something was very, very wrong. Margaret stood frozen in the doorway. For a moment, none of us spoke. Her eyes moved from me to her neighbor, and back again. The grocery bag slipped slightly in my hands, but I didn't notice. My mind was still stuck on two words. The new car. I thought you said you weren't feeling well today, I said slowly. Margaret forced a weak smile. I forgot to text you. I was lying down. The neighbor snorted. Lying down, she said, that's funny. She was out driving an hour ago. Margaret's smile vanished. I don't know why she's saying these things. Margaret said quickly, she's always been jealous. Jealous? The word felt rehearsed, too fast, too easy. I turned my head slightly and looked past the house, toward the driveway behind it. And that's when I saw it. A black SUV. Shiny, clean, new. Not the old rusted sedan I remembered. Not something bought secondhand. This was expensive. My chest tightened. That's not yours, I said, more like a statement than a question. Margaret's mouth opened, then closed. That belongs to a friend. She said, he just parks it here sometimes. The neighbor laughed again, louder this time. Friend, she said, you mean the one who helped her sign the lease. My heart dropped. Lease, I repeated. Margaret snapped. Stop talking, she yelled at the neighbor. This is none of your business. But it was my business, because for 5 years, I had been sacrificing pieces of my life for someone who told me she was barely surviving. Margaret, I said quietly, what lease? She looked at me, really looked, and for the first time since my husband died, I didn't see grief in her eyes. I saw fear. I didn't want to worry you, she said. It's just things change. What things? I asked. She sighed dramatically and gestured toward the house. Why don't you come inside, she said. We can talk privately. The neighbor leaned closer to the fence. She won't tell you everything, she said under her breath. She never does. Margaret shot her a look full of hatred. I hesitated. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to walk away. But another part, the part that still loved my husband, needed answers. I stepped inside. The house smelled different. New furniture, fresh paint, a large flat-screen TV mounted on the wall. My hands began to shake. This wasn't the home of someone struggling. Margaret noticed me looking around. "I made a few changes," she said defensively. "Is that a crime?" "No," I said slowly, "but lying is." Her shoulders stiffened. "I never lied to you." I turned to face her. "Then where did the money go?" Silence. Thick, heavy, suffocating. Finally, she spoke. "You owe me," she said. I stared at her. "What?" "My son is dead," she snapped. "And you moved on. You still have your life, I don't." Moved on. As if grief had an expiration date. "As long as I breathe," she continued. "You'll always owe me for what I lost." Something inside me cracked. "That money was to help you survive." I said, "Not to fund a new lifestyle." Her face hardened. "You don't get to decide that." In that moment, I realized something terrifying. The woman standing in front of me was not the grieving mother I thought she was. And then she said the words that changed everything. "If you stop sending the money," she said coldly, "I'll make sure you regret it." My blood ran cold. "Is that a threat?" I asked. She smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "I'm just telling you how things work." That's when I knew. This wasn't about kindness anymore. This was about control. And I had no idea how far she was willing to go, until I found the envelope hidden in her drawer. I didn't mean to find it. I was looking for the bathroom when I passed the small desk near the hallway. One drawer was slightly open, just enough for me to notice something inside. A thick brown envelope. My name was written on it. Not printed, handwritten. My heart started pounding. Behind me, I could hear Margaret moving dishes in the kitchen, humming softly like nothing was wrong. I slid the drawer open and pulled the envelope out. Inside were documents, legal documents, photocopies of my marriage certificate, my husband's death certificate, bank statements, and something else. A letter, not from a lawyer, from Margaret. I read it once, then again. My hands began to tremble. The letter wasn't emotional. It wasn't grieving. It was calculated. She had written about me as if I were a problem that needed managing. She mentioned continuing financial support, leverage, and future expectations. One line made my stomach turn. If she ever stops sending money, remind her of what she owes and what could be taken from her. Taken? What could she take from me? I flipped through the rest of the papers and felt my breath catch. A draft of a legal claim. Against me. She was planning to accuse me of withholding property that supposedly belonged to her son, assets that didn't exist. False claims, false accusations, but enough to drag me into court. Enough to scare me. Enough to force me to keep paying. "You shouldn't be in there." Her voice cut through the silence. I turned. Margaret stood in the doorway, eyes locked onto the envelope in my hands. "I was just looking for the bathroom," I said, though we both knew that didn't matter anymore. She walked toward me slowly. "You had no right," she said. "No," I replied, my voice shaking. "You had no right." She reached for the envelope, but I pulled it back. "So this was the plan?" I asked. "Intimidate me forever." Her face twisted. "You think this is easy for me?" She snapped. "I lost my son, that house you live in, that job you have, that life. You got to keep everything." I felt tears burn my eyes. "I lost him too," I said, "every single day." She laughed. A cold, empty sound. "You'll never hurt like I do." That was when I realized something horrifying. This wasn't about money. It was about punishment. She wanted me to suffer slowly, quietly, while smiling and saying thank you. I put the envelope back into the drawer, but the damage was done. I saw her clearly now, and she knew it. "Listen," she said, lowering her voice. "We don't need to fight, just keep things the way they are." I took a step back. "No." Her eyes widened. "You don't understand what you're doing." "Oh, I do," I said, "and I'm done." Her calm shattered. "If you walk away," she hissed, "I'll destroy your reputation. I'll tell everyone you abandoned a grieving mother." I swallowed hard. "I don't care." But the truth was I did. Because lies spread faster than truth. I walked out of the house, feeling like the ground beneath me wasn't solid anymore. Outside, the neighbor was still on her porch. She took one look at my face and nodded. You found it, didn't you? She asked. Yes, I said. She's been doing this for years. The woman said quietly, different people, different stories. My chest tightened. How many? I asked. The neighbor didn't answer. She just looked away. That night I barely slept. Every sound made me jump. Every notification on my phone made my heart race. And just when I thought the worst was over, I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. It said, "We need to talk about your husband. There's something you don't know." I stared at the message for a long time. We need to talk about your husband. There's something you don't know. My first instinct was to delete it. Scams, trolls, cruel people who fed on grief, I'd seen them all before. But something about this felt different. The message didn't ask for money, didn't explain itself, didn't beg for attention. It felt careful. I typed back, "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. Almost. "Hello," I said. A man's voice came through the line, calm, low, older. "My name is Daniel," he said. "I worked with your husband." My heart skipped. "At the warehouse?" I asked, because he changed jobs 3 years before he. "No," the man interrupted gently. "Before he died." Silence stretched between us. "I don't understand," I said. "I know," Daniel replied. "That's why I'm calling. He asked me to contact you if something ever happened." My throat went dry. "He never mentioned you," I whispered. "That was intentional," Daniel said. "He was trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" Daniel hesitated. "Your husband wasn't just supporting his mother. He said he was paying for something she did." My hand tightened around the phone. "What did she do?" I asked. "She took out loans in his name," Daniel said. "Large ones." My stomach dropped. "She told him it was temporary." He continued. "Said she'd lose the house otherwise." He believed her. "Of course he did." "He paid them quietly," Daniel said. "Every month, and when he couldn't anymore, she came to you." The room felt like it was spinning. "That's not possible," I said. "He would have told me." Daniel sighed. "He tried more than once, but every time he backed out." "Why?" I asked. "Because she threatened him," Daniel said. "With you." I couldn't breathe. "She told him if you ever found out, she'd make sure you were blamed." She had documents prepared even back then. The envelope, the lies, the fear. They argued the week before his death. Daniel continued. "He told me he was done paying, that he was finally going to tell you everything." My chest felt tight. "And then," I whispered. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "Then he died," he said. Suddenly, unexpectedly. A chill crawled up my spine. "You're not saying," I began. "I don't know what happened," Daniel said quickly. "But I know this. Margaret didn't lose a grieving son. She lost her control." My phone slipped from my hand and landed on the couch beside me. Every memory replayed itself in a new light. Her tears, her gratitude, her constant reminders of what she'd lost. It wasn't grief. It was leverage. Daniel spoke again. "There's something else," he said. "Before he died, your husband moved something into your name. Quietly." "What?" I asked. "A safety deposit box," Daniel said. "He never told his mother." My heart pounded. "What's in it?" I asked. "I don't know," Daniel replied. "But Margaret has been trying to access it ever since. That's why she needed me scared. That's why she needed me obedient." "Where is it?" I asked. Daniel gave me the address. When the call ended, I sat there in the dark, shaking. For the first time since my husband died, I wasn't just grieving. I was angry. And I finally understood something terrifying. Margaret wasn't done with me. Not yet. Because the moment I opened that safety deposit box, everything would change. The bank was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes every footstep sound louder than it should. I sat across from the banker, my hands folded tightly in my lap, trying to keep them from shaking. He slid a form toward me and pointed to the signature line. "Once you open the box," he said calmly, "anything inside becomes your responsibility." I nodded. I had already been carrying this responsibility for years. I just hadn't known it. The vault door opened with a deep metallic hum. Rows of steel boxes stretched out in front of me, all identical except one. The banker stopped and pulled out a small box with my name engraved on it. Not Margaret's. Mine. He placed it on the table and stepped back. "Take your time," he said. I opened it. Inside was a thick folder, neatly organized. My husband had always been careful like that, even with things that scared him. The first document made my breath catch. A notarized statement, written by my husband, in his handwriting. It explained everything. The loans, the threats, the years of silence. He wrote about how ashamed he felt for hiding the truth from me, how he believed protecting me meant carrying the burden alone. At the bottom of the page, one sentence stood out. If you are reading this, it means I couldn't stop her in time. My vision blurred. I flipped the page. There were bank records showing every payment he had made, and after his death, every payment I had unknowingly continued. Margaret's name appeared again and again. Then came the final document, a legal affidavit, signed, stamped, official. It stated that any financial support sent after his death was voluntary and could not be claimed, demanded, or legally enforced. In other words, Margaret had no power. None. I sat there for a long time after the banker left me alone. Grief washed over me, but it wasn't the helpless kind anymore. It was clarity. When I left the bank, my phone buzzed. Margaret. I didn't answer. Another call. Then a text. Why did you go to the bank? My blood ran cold. She knew. Before I could respond, another message came in. You think you're smarter than me. Then another. You owe me. I stopped walking. Typed one message. Not anymore. 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. Then my phone rang again. I answered this time. You had no right, Margaret screamed. That box was never yours. It was, I said calmly, and now I know everything. Her breathing grew sharp. He lied to you, she said. He always did. No, I replied, you did. There was a pause. Then her voice dropped, low and dangerous. If you expose me, she said, I'll tell everyone what kind of wife you really were. I closed my eyes. For years, that threat would have destroyed me, I said, but not anymore. She laughed bitterly. You think papers can save you? No, I said, the truth will. I hung up. That night, I slept better than I had in years. But the story wasn't over. Because the next morning, there was a knock at my door. And when I opened it, Margaret was standing there. Not crying, not screaming, smiling. And in that smile, I saw it. Desperation. Margaret stood on my doorstep like she belonged there. Her hair was perfectly styled. Her coat was expensive. And her smile didn't reach her eyes. I thought we should talk, she said sweetly. I stepped aside and let her in. The moment the door closed behind her, the air changed. She looked around my living room slowly, deliberately, as if inspecting something she still believed belonged to her. You've done well for yourself. She said. He would have been proud. Don't mention him, I thought. Not now. I don't have much time, I said. Say what you came to say. Her smile faded just a little. You've misunderstood everything. She said. I never wanted things to get unpleasant. Unpleasant, I repeated. You threaten me, you plan to destroy me. She sighed and sat down like this was a casual visit. I did what I had to do, she said. You don't understand what it's like to lose a child. I felt my chest tighten. You didn't just lose him, I said. You used him. Her eyes flashed. That's a disgusting thing to say. Is it? I asked. Or does it just finally sound true? She leaned forward. Listen to me, she said quietly. People will believe me, a grieving mother, not a widow who cut off support. There is proof, I said. She laughed. Proof doesn't matter, she said. Stories do. That sentence told me everything. This ends today, I said. You're not getting another dollar. Her jaw tightened. You think walking away makes you innocent. She said, I can still ruin you. I took a deep breath. I already spoke to a lawyer, I said. Her eyes flickered. And I'm not afraid anymore. Silence filled the room. Then something changed in her face. The softness vanished. The mask cracked. You were never good enough for my son. She said suddenly, you took him from me. There it was. The truth she'd been hiding. I loved him, I said, and he loved me. She stood up abruptly. He chose you, she spat, and I made sure you paid for that choice. My hands shook, not with fear but rage. You punished me for being loved. I said, that's not grief, that's cruelty. Her voice dropped. You don't walk away from me, she said. No one does. I walked to the door and opened it. You don't walk into my life again, I replied. Ever. For a moment, I thought she might refuse. Then she smiled again. Slow, thin, empty. This isn't over, she said. I watched her walk away down the driveway, her heels clicking against the pavement. I locked the door, and for the first time, I didn't feel small. But freedom has a cost, because 2 days later, I got served with papers. Margaret was suing me. The envelope was thick, official, heavy in a way that had nothing to do with paper. I stood in my doorway, holding it, while the delivery man walked away, already forgetting my face, but this moment would stay with me forever. Margaret was suing me. Financial abandonment, emotional distress, unjust enrichment. The words felt unreal. By the afternoon, the phone calls started. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years, distant relatives, people who suddenly just wanted to check in. Had you heard? Is it true? Why would you cut off a grieving mother? Margaret moved fast. By the next morning, her story was everywhere. A widowed daughter-in-law who turned cold. A helpless elderly mother left destitute. 5 years of support cruelly ripped away. She cried on cue, spoke softly, mentioned her dead son in every sentence. And people believed her, because grief looks convincing when you know how to perform it. My lawyer warned me. She's building a narrative, he said, and narratives can be dangerous. I didn't respond publicly. Not yet, because this wasn't about noise. It was about timing. Court day came faster than I expected. Margaret arrived dressed in black, leaning on a cane she'd never needed before. Reporters gathered, cameras flashed. She looked fragile. I looked calm, and that alone made people suspicious. Inside the courtroom, she took the stand first. Her voice trembled as she spoke about losing her son, about loneliness, about how I had promised to take care of her. I watched the jury's faces soften. Then it was my turn. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I told the truth. About the payments. About the threats. About the envelope. My lawyer submitted the documents from the safety deposit box. The room changed. Margaret stiffened. When the judge reviewed the affidavit, his expression hardened. Then came the moment I'll never forget. Margaret's lawyer asked her one simple question. Did you ever threaten the defendant if she stopped sending money? Margaret hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. No, she said. That's when my lawyer stood up. Your Honor, he said, we would like to submit recorded voicemail evidence. Margaret's face drained of color. The recording played through the courtroom. Her voice, clear, cold. If you stop sending the money, she said, you'll regret it. Gasps filled the room. Margaret tried to speak, but the judge raised his hand. In that moment, her story collapsed. The grieving mother disappeared. And what stood in her place was a woman exposed. The courtroom was silent, not the tense kind of silence, the heavy kind. The kind that settles after the truth has nowhere left to hide. Margaret stared straight ahead, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked down at the documents one last time. This court finds no legal obligation, he said, his voice firm, requiring the defendant to provide financial support. Margaret's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. The evidence presented, the judge continued, shows a clear pattern of intimidation and misrepresentation. My heart pounded. The claim is dismissed. A sharp breath escaped my lungs. Dismissed. Margaret's head snapped toward me. For the first time, there was no anger in her eyes, only panic. But that's not all, the judge said. He turned to her. Based on the evidence submitted, this court recommends further review regarding potential financial fraud. Whispers erupted across the room. Margaret's shoulders sagged. The woman who once controlled every room she entered suddenly looked small. Outside the courthouse, reporters rushed toward me. How does it feel to win? One asked. I shook my head. This was never about winning. I said, it was about stopping something that should have never happened. Margaret exited from the side door. No cameras, no sympathy, just consequences. That night, I went home alone. I sat on the couch, holding the folder from the safety deposit box, and opened the last envelope inside. It was a note from my husband. Short, simple. I'm sorry I didn't protect you sooner. I hope one day you'll feel free. Tears finally came. Not from pain, from release. I placed the letter back into the folder and stood up. 5 years of fear ended that day. Not because the court said so, but because I chose myself. I no longer send $200 every month. I send my energy toward living, toward healing, toward a future that isn't controlled by guilt. And sometimes, when the house is quiet, I swear I can feel him there, not as a memory tied to pain, but as a reminder that love should never be used as a weapon. Days turned into weeks. Margaret was no longer a shadow over my life. Court papers confirmed her fraud, and the authorities quietly began reviewing the situation. No more threats, no more lies, no more fear. I started organizing my life differently. Friends I had pushed away returned. Work became lighter because my mind wasn't weighed down by anxiety. The small things hit differently now. The morning sunlight falling across the living room, the smell of coffee brewing, the sound of laughter from a neighbor's child. I visited my husband's grave one evening. The air was crisp, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. I spoke aloud, though no one was there to hear me. "I'm free," I said softly, "because you protected me. Even after you were gone, I finally understand." At that moment, I felt the weight of 5 years lift. Pain remained, of course, because love doesn't vanish with closure. But anger, fear, and manipulation, all of that was gone. For the first time, I realized what my husband had tried to teach me all along. Love is not a transaction. Trust is not a burden. And freedom comes when you refuse to be held hostage by someone else's guilt. Weeks later, I donated the remaining funds, the ones I had sent for Margaret, to a charity supporting widows in need. No strings attached, no threats, just love. And finally, I slept peacefully, knowing I had honored my husband's memory in the only way that mattered. The chapter was closed. The story wasn't just about deception. It was about courage, resilience, and the power of truth. And most importantly, it was mine. Months passed, but the lessons remained. I learned how strong I could be when pushed to the edge. I discovered that grief could be transformed into courage. And I realized that truth, no matter how hidden, will always find a way to surface. Margaret faded from my life completely. The court case, the lies, the threats, all of it became a distant memory. I started helping others who had been manipulated or threatened, sharing my story quietly, hoping to inspire them to stand up for themselves. Sometimes I still feel the pangs of loss. Sometimes I still think about what could have been. But most of the time, I feel free. And that freedom, the clarity, is worth more than any money, any lie, or any threat. Because finally, I chose me. And that choice changed everything.